Most people believe that leaving a narcissist requires a final conversation, a confrontation, an explanation, a last attempt to make them understand. What they don't realize is that the explanation is the one thing the narcissist was counting on, and withholding it is the one thing their system was never built to survive. There is something that every target of a narcissistic relationship has done, repeatedly, consistently, and with the sincere belief that it was a necessary component of honest communication that was simultaneously functioning as the primary maintenance system of the narcissist's control. Explaining themselves, what most people don't realize is that every explanation offered inside a narcissistic dynamic for a decision, a feeling, a boundary, a reaction, a need was never received as communication in any genuine sense. It was received as material, raw material for the construction of a counterargument, a reframing, a subtle invalidation, or a full reversal of whatever the explanation was attempting to justify. The explanation provided the narcissist with the specific content they needed to engage. And engagement in the narcissist's relational system is always preferable to the absence of it, because engagement can be shaped and silence cannot. This is the explanation as control infrastructure. And its function was never visible from the inside, because from the inside it simply felt like communication, like two people attempting to understand each other through the ordinary human mechanism of expressing and receiving reasons. Pay attention to what this reveals about every conversation in which a stated reason was met with a counter reason. Every boundary that was explained and then argued against, every feeling that was expressed and then analyzed back into non-existence, every decision that was communicated and then dismantled through the specific tactic of engaging with its stated justification rather than with the decision itself. The hidden reason, the narcissist always engaged with the explanation rather than with the decision as structural. The decision unaccompanied by explanation has no surface to grip. The explanation provides the grip. And once the grip is established, the decision becomes negotiable, regardless of how finally it was framed. This is where the narrative vacuum reveals its significance, because an unexplained departure doesn't simply remove the grip. It removes the entire surface that the grip required. The narcissist, accustomed to receiving the raw material of the target's reasoning and working with it to reshape the outcome, now faces something they were never designed to process, and ending with no raw material at all. Most people miss this warning sign because leaving without explanation feels incomplete, as though the departure owes the person being left an account of itself. The hidden reason this feeling is itself a residue of the narcissist's conditioning is that the expectation of explanation was never a neutral social norm in this relationship. It was a manufactured dependency installed through the consistent pattern of engaging with reasons rather than respecting decisions that ensured the target would feel obligated to provide the very material the narcissist needed to contest every departure. There is a mechanism that operates in every narcissistic relationship that most people experience repeatedly without ever identifying it as a mechanism, because it presents itself each time it activates as a specific conversation about a specific issue rather than as the predictable deployment of a recurring system. It is the reversal mechanism, and it is the primary tool through which narcissists have historically converted departures into returns. What most people don't realize is that the reversal mechanism is not improvised. It follows a consistent structure, one that depends entirely on having the target's stated reasons available to work with. The target says they are leaving because of a specific behavior. The narcissist engages with the specific behavior, reframing it, denying it, attributing it to the target's misperception, or acknowledging it in a form so partial and so quickly pivoted away from that. The acknowledgement itself becomes a new argument. The target's reason, which was stated in order to communicate a decision, gets converted into the opening position of a negotiation that the target never intended to enter. This process is extraordinarily effective because it exploits something genuine in the target: the desire to be understood, to have their experience validated, to achieve the recognition that the stated reason was legitimate. Each attempt to defend the reason as legitimate draws the target further into the negotiation and further away from the decision the reason was supposed to justify. Pay attention to what removing the stated reasons does to this mechanism, because it does not simply make the reversal more difficult. It makes the reversal impossible. The mechanism requires an entry point, a specific reason that can be engaged with, reframed, or dismantled. An unexplained departure provides no entry point. There is nothing to reframe because nothing was offered, nothing to dismantle because nothing was presented for examination. The mechanism activates and finds nothing to work with. This is where the identity destabilization becomes visible in the narcissist's behavior, because the reversal mechanism's failure is not simply an operational problem. It is an identity problem. The narcissist's sense of self is maintained, in significant part, through the continuous confirmation of their version of reality, and their version of reality in every relationship consistently includes the premise that their position is the reasonable one, that the target's concerns are manageable, and that any departure can be addressed through the appropriate application of the right combination of arguments, emotions, and pressure. Most people miss this warning sign because the identity destabilization produces behavioral responses that look on the surface like ordinary distress at the end of a relationship. The hidden reason it is something more structurally significant is that the distress is not simply about the loss. It is about the specific impossibility of responding to a loss that provided nothing to respond to. There is a story the narcissist tells, continuously, internally, and with a consistency that most people in their life never have sufficient information to challenge, about their own position in every relationship they occupy. In this story, they are the more significant party, the more desirable one, the one whose presence in any relationship represents a contribution that the other person is fortunate to receive. This story is not simply a conscious preference or a social performance. It is a structural requirement, the internal narrative that the narcissist's sense of self depends on in a way that makes its disruption not merely uncomfortable, but genuinely destabilizing. What most people don't realize is how completely an unexplained departure disrupts this narrative. Because the narcissist's superiority story can accommodate many different kinds of endings. Endings that come with arguments, with accusations, with tearful declarations of hurt. All of these can be incorporated into a narrative that positions the narcissist as the aggrieved, misunderstood, or simply unlucky party in a relationship that ended for reasons that reflect poorly on the person who left. What the superiority narrative cannot accommodate is the specific implication of an unexplained departure. That someone found the relationship, and the narcissist within it, so entirely not worth engaging with that. Even the courtesy of an explanation was withheld. Pay attention to what this implication does to the internal story the narcissist has been maintaining, because it introduces a conclusion the narrative cannot absorb without producing a version of events that the narcissist's psychology is structurally incapable of accepting. This is exactly what they want you to believe is unnecessary, that leaving without explanation is cruel, incomplete, or unfair. The hidden reason this belief serves the narcissist's interests so precisely is that it ensures the target returns with the explanation the narcissist needed to prevent the departure from being final. This is where the obsessive loop activation becomes the most visible behavioral consequence of the unexplained departure. Because the narcissist's mind, designed to work with material, finds itself in a situation where no material was provided, and the absence of material does not produce stillness in a system designed for engagement. It produces a compulsive generation of hypothetical material. The narcissist cycles through possible explanations for the departure, constructing reasons, testing them against the available evidence, and rejecting them, not because the possible reasons are inaccurate, but because each accurate reason locates the cause of the departure in the narcissist's own behavior. And behavior-located explanations require the one thing the narcissist system was specifically constructed to prevent: accountability, genuine, non-deflectable, non-reversible acknowledgement of responsibility. Most people miss this warning sign because the obsessive loop produces no visible external behavior in its early stages. It operates internally, a relentless, circular examination of an ending that provided nothing to examine until the internal pressure it generates exceeds the capacity of internal management and begins producing the behavioral responses that the narcissist's social environment eventually observes. There is a specific quality to the hoovering that follows an unexplained departure that distinguishes it from every other re-engagement attempt the narcissist has previously deployed, not in its underlying function, which remains identical to all previous hoovering, but in the visible absence of the one quality that made previous hoovering so difficult to recognize as a tactic: strategic precision. What most people don't realize is that the narcissist's ordinary hoovering is calibrated. It arrives at specific times, deploys specific emotional content, and targets specific vulnerabilities that the narcissist identified during the relationship as most likely to produce re-engagement. This calibration was always built from the same source: the target's stated reasons, their expressed feelings, their communicated needs, all the material that accumulated across the relationship's history of explanations. The unexplained departure removes the calibration's foundation. The narcissist knows the tactics, but has lost the targeting system that made those tactics effective with this particular person, in this particular moment. And without accurate targeting, the hoovering becomes something it was never designed to be: visible. Pay attention to what poorly targeted hoovering looks like in practice, because its lack of precision communicates the desperation driving it with a clarity that sophisticated, calibrated hoovering never reveals. Messages that shift tone within the same conversation as the narcissist, cycles through approaches without feedback to determine which one is landing. Appeals to emotions that the relationship's history suggests should be potent, but that arrive with a timing and a framing that reveals they were selected from a general inventory rather than from an accurate read of the target's current state. The hoovering without leverage reveals something about the narcissist's operational dependency on the target's explanations that no amount of behavioral analysis from the outside could expose as clearly as the desperation of the targeting system free attempt itself. Most people miss this warning sign because the poorly targeted hoovering still looks, in individual moments, like the kind of emotional appeal that characterized previous re-engagement attempts. The hidden reason it is qualitatively different is not in the content, but in what the content is missing: the specific accuracy that comes from having material to calibrate against. This is where the witness anxiety amplification becomes the most socially significant consequence of the unexplained departure. Because while the hoovering reveals the operational panic to the target, the witness anxiety reveals it in the social environment surrounding the relationship. The narcissist, who throughout the relationship maintained a coherent social narrative about the dynamic, one that consistently positioned them favorably and made the target's experience of the relationship's difficulties seem either exaggerated or self-caused, now faces a specific and unprecedented challenge. They cannot construct a coherent account of the ending. What most people don't realize is that the narcissist's social narrative about any relationship was always built, in significant part, from the target's own stated concerns, reframed, yes, distorted, yes, but grounded in content that the target provided. When someone leaves without explanation, the narcissist has no content to reframe. They cannot say the target left because of a concern they can make sound unreasonable. Because no concern was stated, they cannot describe the final conversation in terms that make the narcissist's position seem defensible. Because there was no final conversation, the ending has no content. And an ending with no content cannot be narratively managed in the way the narcissist's image maintenance requires. Pay attention to what this produces in the narcissist's social behavior after an unexplained departure, because the attempts to fill the narrative vacuum with retrospectively constructed explanations reveal the image management machinery in a state of unusual and informative exposure. The accounts that emerge are visibly constructed rather than recounted. They lack the specific detail that genuine experience produces. They change in ways that reveal they are being adjusted in response to social feedback rather than being remembered from actual events. Most people miss this warning sign because they are not in a position to observe the narcissist's social behavior after the departure. The hidden reason it is so revealing to anyone who is in a position to observe it is that the absence of material to work with forces the machinery to operate without its primary input. And machinery operating without its primary input always reveals its workings more clearly than machinery running smoothly. There is a quality of communication that an unexplained departure carries that no amount of carefully worded final statements, however firm, however detailed, however thoroughly articulated, ever quite manages to convey with the same completeness. Finality, what most people don't realize is that stated reasons, however definitive their framing, always contain an implicit invitation. The invitation to engage with the reasons, to respond to them, to produce counter reasons that might shift the conclusion the reasons were offered to justify. This invitation is not intentional. It is structural. Reasons, by their nature, exist in a conversational space where responses are possible, and the narcissist system, detecting that conversational space, immediately moves to occupy it. The unexplained departure eliminates the conversational space entirely. There is no response possible to an absence of reasons. Not because no response exists, but because the absence of reasons communicates something that response cannot address. That the conversation is over, not paused, not pending the narcissist's response, not contingent on whether a sufficient argument can be produced. Simply, completely, and structurally over in a way that the provision of reasons could never quite achieve. Because reasons always leave room for better reasons in response. Pay attention to what this permanence recognition produces in the narcissist's behavior, because it is one of the most behaviorally distinctive responses in the entire post-departure sequence. The narcissist who has received a final explanation, however clearly stated, retains the behavioral orientation of someone whose departure has not yet been fully processed as permanent. They remain in a posture of potential re-engagement. The narcissist, who received no explanation, enters a different behavioral state, one that oscillates, sometimes rapidly, between the compulsive re-engagement attempts of the hoovering phase and a kind of stunned, poorly managed stasis that the behavioral management systems are insufficiently resourced to organize into the coherent post-relationship performance the narcissist typically produces. Most people miss this warning sign because the oscillation looks like ordinary grief. The hidden reason it is structurally different is that grief processes an acknowledged loss. What the narcissist is processing is not a loss. It is an incomprehensibility, an ending that arrived without the content that their entire relational system depended on receiving in order to understand what happened and what to do next. This is where the self-confrontation that the unexplained departure forces becomes the most psychologically significant consequence of the entire sequence. Because the absence of an external explanation leaves only one available source of meaning for what happened. The narcissist's own behavior, examined without the distraction of an external explanation to engage with, reframe, or contest. Most people never realize that this forced self-confrontation is the specific experience the narcissist's entire behavioral architecture was constructed to prevent, not through any conscious awareness of what the architecture was protecting against, but through the automatic and continuous deployment of every available mechanism to ensure that external engagement, external material, and external narrative always remained available as alternatives to internal examination. The unexplained departure removes all of those alternatives simultaneously. And what it leaves behind is the one thing the narcissist was never equipped to sit with: themselves without an audience, without a target, without material to work with, in the silence of an ending that offered them nothing to do. What most people don't realize is that leaving without explaining is not cruelty. It is not incompleteness. It is the first and only interaction with the narcissist that was conducted entirely on the target's terms, without providing the raw material. The narcissist needed to convert it into something they could manage, contest, or control. Every previous explanation handed the narcissist something to work with. The unexplained departure handed them nothing, and nothing. For a system entirely dependent on the continuous provision of other people's emotional and psychological material is not simply an inconvenience. It is the specific condition under which the system has no choice but to encounter what it was always running from, the truth of what it actually is, without anyone else's words to hide behind. And that encounter, however brief, however defended against, is the one the narcissist's entire behavioral life was constructed to prevent. The unexplained departure simply made it unavoidable.